What's up, everybody? I'm your host, MJ, and we're going to take another trip down horror lane. So, as you can tell from the title, I'm going to be talking about and sharing my favorite horror films from the early 2000s. So, not top 10, but top 5. Not top 10, not top 20, not top 15, but my favorite 5. My favorite 5 horror films from the early 2000s. Now, from you guys that already know, a lot of you guys may know that and actually you guys that are actually major, huge horror fans, you know that the early 2000s is arguably one of the best evers to actually put out and produce horror films. Okay, I will say arguably, I would probably put the early 2000s maybe in the third spot. I couldn't give it the number 2 or number 1 spot. I would definitely, you guys know how I feel about that. If you watch some of my other content, I would have to give the more benefit of the doubt to the 90s and the 80s. But I do feel that, and I do strongly believe that the early 2000s did produce and put out some very, very good, solid films that were actually some major hits. So I'm going to be sharing with you guys my personal 5, not you guys' favorite 5, but my favorite 5, my favorite 5 horror films from the 2000s era. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go count down. I'm going to start from number 5 and count down to number 1. So coming in at number 5. My number 5 favorite horror film from the early 2000s is The Descent. Okay? The Descent. If you guys don't know The Descent revolves around a woman who faces a tragic accident years prior, and then when her and her friends they come together and reunite for this little weekend, they decide to go and start searching and just do a little going outdoors into this mysterious cave, and then it turns out to be they have to face some creatures. They got to find their way out, but also they have to fight off some just creatures that's way deep down these caves and everything deep below. So The Decent, that was a very good film. If you have not watched the film, I highly recommend you watch it. Every single film that I list, if you have not watched it, I will leave a link to the description and a title to the description of these films, but you make sure you go watch them if you haven't watched them. But The Descent, number 5. Number 4, my number four most favorite film from the early 2000s eras I would have to give it to See No Evil. See No Evil, which came out in 2006. I believe it was 2006. Correct me if I'm wrong. But See No Evil, starring the Kane from the WWE. Okay, See No Evil. See No Evil was a very, very good movie. I like the story structure and how it was always structured. I also like the little storyline between the protagonist and the antagonist. If you guys don't know, I'm a huge fan of those type of the YA type of horror. That's some of my, if not my best type of horror films would be when it has to do with the YA genre. Okay. So for those of you guys that don't know about that, I'll say that maybe for a possible another episode. But I like the YA horror genre movies. They're so phenomenal. But this is what See No Evil was. But See No Evil had some uniqueness to it, and I like the whole story structure. And I do think that Kane, the WWE wrestler Kane, I think he did do a pretty decent job in this as the main antagonist. And it was nice to see something fresh and new in blood. It wasn't a copycat. And I also think that it was casted properly too as well. For those of you guys that don't know, there are multiple things that would make what makes a horror film successful or makes it fail. And that even pertains even outside of the horror genres, but we're talking specifically genre horror. But there are certain key attributes and characteristics what can make or break a horror film. And I think See No Evil had a lot of different aspects and characteristics, is which made it one of my most favorite films and probably a fan favorite horror film from the early 2000s. So once again, See No Evil, the 2006 film See No Evil is my 4th most favorite film from the early 2000s era. Coming in at my number 3. My third, now, our number 3 and number 2 was very tricky because I could have went either way. Now, so I'll just go like this. I'm going to put number 3. My third most favorite film from the early 2000s eras would be the 2007 film Trickr Treat. Trickr Treat. Trick Treat, I overall personally think that Trick Treat was a good movie. It had its own uniqueness to it. What I like most about Trick Treat is that it gave us that story structure where it was not only was it multiple short stories, because see, I like those. I like those type of films, or especially horror films where they give us like multiple short tales. and that's the whole movie is about multiple short tales. But what I like about this one in particular, Trick or Treat, is Trick or Treat. I like how the writer incorporated the short tales to revolve around each other. Like as you've seen through each short tale of Trick or Treat, we saw that it had that we had to keep going back and forth, seeing how each and every short tale was relevant to each and every tale. That's how it was doing that. So I like that synchronization. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of certain type of horrors like that, especially a horror movie. You don't really see a lot of horror movies where it's a horror movie, but it's multiple short tales. So I'm a huge fan of that. I like horror movies that have it's a movie, but then it have a multiple group of short tales. I like that. But long as it makes sense and long as it's good, I'm perfectly fine with it. So that was my third spot. So as I said, Trick or Treat was number third spot. Now, arguably, I could have put it in number 2 spot, but I'm about to get ready to list the number 2 spot and the number 1 spot in my top 5 most favorite horror films in early 2000s. But before I go in, we're going to go right again and we're going to go run through from the 5 to the third spot. So my 5th most favorite film was the 2000 film, The Descent. My 4th most favorite film from the early 2000s was the 2006 film, See No Evil, starring Kane, the WWE wrestler. My 3rd most favorite film, horror film from the early 2000s, was the Trick or Treat film. It was a Trick or Treat, which actually was released in 2007. Trick or Treat, 2007, Trick or Treat. I like the whole story structure, as I said. I like the whole multiple short tales, and I like how they sync with each other. So that was my bottom 3. Now we're going to get into the top 2. Okay. Now, arguably, my number 1 spot was solid. Okay, it was solid. So here we go. My number 2 most favorite horror film from the early 2000s. I would have to give it to, and not only this film actually was released in 2000. I would have to give the number 2 spot to Final Destination. Yes, Final Destination. Final Destinations was a very good series, and it lasted for a little while. It had, what was it about? Maybe, 4 or 5 films? I think it was 5 Final Destinations films. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 5 Final Destinations. But Final Destination, I like the type of horror it gave us. It was more like that superstitious type of horror, like superstitious type of. So we had that that type of vibe where it was these, those stories we talk about, like, why are you being so superstitious about this and about that, like walking on the wrong side of the road, or if you cross around a pole, don't cross around somebody, all things like that, all the little superstitious things. I like how that movie was constructed. Final Destination overall to me was a hell of a series and hell of a franchise. I don't think I really had any problem with none of the Final Destinations films. I liked all of them. They were all pretty solid and decent. But I have to give Final Destination, yes, my number 1 spot. I would have to say for the early 2000s, Final Destination would be my second most favorite horror film from the early 2000s. Now, without any further ado, my number one most liked film from the early 2000 eras, I would have to hands down give it to Malfunction right there. But anyways, my number 1 spot, I would have to give it to Jeepers Creepers. The 2001 film Jeepers Creepers. Jeepers Creepers, it was a hell of a film. I like the story structure. I love the antagonist. I like the whole antagonist, but I like the structure between the protagonists, because we had 2 protagonists and we had 1 antagonist. I like that story structure we saw between them, but it just wasn't they didn't give us, like with Jeepers Creepers, it just wasn't giving us type of any quick scare or something to make people like, it was really flowing. The flow of the structure, the flow of the film of Jeepers Creepers, it was solid. And it was pretty decent, and it made sense, and it gave us the connection between the creeper versus the teenagers. And I like, one of the main things I like is it gave us a good foundation and blueprint of the creeper. It gave us the foundation of what the creeper was about, he or she, but what the creeper was about, and the backstory of the creeper. And it was like just come to reveal and find out that this is something that has like been going on. It's like a traditional thing that's just been going on. I love that. It was just so phenomenal. Jeepers Creepers, like I said, that was my number 1 most favorite. Or when I'm thinking of that, just basically my top five of the early 2000s. I love it was a lot of other films, trust me, a lot of films that the 2000s put out that I think were pretty solid and decent. But when I'm talking about my most favorite, five favorite films, I would have to hands down give it to the ones that I listed in here. So we're gonna run through them one more time. My fifth favorite film from the early 2000s, The Descent. My fourth favorite film from the early 2000s, See No Evil. My third favorite film from the early 2000s, Trick or Treat. My second favorite film, Final Destination, and my number one favorite film from the early 2000s, Jeepers Creepers. Now, before I get ready to wrap this video up, I also want to let you guys know that there were some close, very close runner-ups in this race for my top five. But I didn't really want to I could have did a top 10, but I didn't really want to do a top 10. I just wanted to really do a top five and give my five most. I think, to me, if we're talking about which eras breaks down and which eras produces or have produced the best horror films or was the best time for horror films, I would have to say that you have to think about certain films that you know without a shadow of doubt that are just phenomenal films, that are major hits and are unforgettable. And I think that these five films that I named, they are very well unforgettable. Everyone can remember these films. If you have not watched any of these films, I highly recommend you watch them. Now, as I said, there were other films also that were pretty decent, but I just couldn't give them the budge over the ones that I put in here. So I'm going to give you just a list, a couple that I think were actually from the early 2000s were sleepers as well. Number one, The Ring. The Ring. The Ring was an actually good film. Now, I wasn't too fond of the follow-up film of The Ring, but the first Ring film, it was actually a solid, decent film. And another film, which I would say was my number one runner-up spot, would be the film. What was it? The 2006 film Stay Alive. Stay Alive was an actually good film. Now, I will admit, now, Stay Alive, the movie Stay Alive, it wasn't properly casted, okay? It could have had a better, decent cast, but it had just couple of cast members that were known and that actually good actor or actresses that actually kept the interest of the viewer engaged into the film. Because so actually Stay Alive with Frankie Muniz and Sophia Bush, okay? They were known, okay? So I think that it was solid, but it could have had a better cast, but it was still a solid film overall. I like the storyline and the plot twist of the antagonist. It was good. It just wasn't something simple and basic. It made sense. It flowed. I think, yeah, Stay Alive. I could have put Stay Alive in the top five, but I just couldn't put it above the ones that I had here. Stay Alive was a good film, but I don't think that it will be considered as one where you're talking about the top tier. The top tier is just the best of the best of the best because of certain reasons. I do think, as I said, it could have been a little bit overall casted a little bit better, added a couple of more cast members to it to make the film more attainable and more watchable and more visible to the masses of people. Excuse me. But overall, the Stay Alive movie was still good. For those of you guys that have not seen Stay Alive, if you haven't, I don't know what you've been doing, but if you haven't watched the Stay Alive movie, Stay Alive was a movie basically about, and we don't really see many movies like this, so that's what I liked about it as well. But Stay Alive was pretty much about a group of friends where they were playing, when they play a game. For first, it starts off where they're uncovering, find out that one of the friends, they come to find out that one of the main protagonist's friends, three of the people that he knows, winds up getting picked off and wind up dying. And they start realizing, after they had already played the game, then they start realizing that the same game that they had just finished playing, that there were people that had actually died, not only died, but died the exact way they died in the game. And so that became the whole storyline and structure of the Stay Alive movie. So Stay Alive was actually my number one runner-up film. And as I said, came in second place. My second place most runner-up film would have to be The Ring. But there were some other ones, for instance, like The Hills Have Eyes, the movie The Others, The Orphan. Okay, so there were movies, but talking about my top five, I think I was right on point with it. That's my favorite five. I'm curious to know what is your guys' most memorable and most favorite horror films from the early 2000s? You're more than welcome to comment and share in the comments and let me know what were your most favorite, or if you don't want to do five, just give me one or two of your most best favorite horror films from the early 2000s. So I want to thank you guys once again for tuning into the show. Always give much love and appreciate to you guys. So you guys already know do. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to share this video. So until next time, thank you for tuning into Horror Lane. Peace.